Hello, everybody. Welcome to Webinar Wednesday. My name is Martin Lovers. I'm the Chief Trend Watcher of Supply Chain Media. You may also know me as the Editor-in-Chief of Supply Chain Movement, quarterly magazine in Europe, but also a website, bi-weekly newsletter. And this afternoon, we have a great, interesting live webinar talking about all the disruptions in the logistics industry and also about future strategies of the parties involved. So we will talk about this matter in the next 60 minutes. And next to me, I have an excellent expert. You see me on the left, and on the right-hand side, you see Matthias Hanke. He is responsible for Central European logistic industry and also a managing partner of Switzerland for Roland Berger. Matthias, hi.
Hi, Martin. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Okay, thanks. Before we start into the topics discussed, so this webinar will be recorded. The PDF will be made available afterwards. All the audience is on mute, but you can all ask questions. So you see two kind of functionality available for that purpose. So you have the chat function on the right hand side, but also you have so you can talk with each other. But please use the Q&A function. So you see the word clouds, the question clouds, and then you can ask the questions, and even you can vote on each other's questions. So that's how we will do it. If the questions are in line of the discussion I will be having with Matthias, I will ask this question right away. So we keep it interactive. So it's a bit like talk radio. So you can listen, but also ask questions to the people discussing. And there will be a Q&A at the end. So 5 minutes before the hour, there will be a Q&A for some extra questions, but I will ask this question immediately. If you still have questions to Matthias or myself, we have an extra 30 minutes afterwards. So you can sit down in the lounge, the digital lounge afterwards at 5 o'clock. So we will be there 30 minutes afterwards. So you have a further conversation with the two of us if you want to. So, but do ask the questions along the way, and feel free to interrupt, and I will pick it up. So, Matthias, maybe you could explain a bit more about yourself and Roland Berger, and then we go to the logistic industry.
Yes, thank you, Martin. A few names about myself. So I'm a senior partner in this consultancy. Means I'm elder than the average in this company. A bit about my track record. After uni, so I studied economics and mechanical engineering. Then I went to Roland Berger, de facto the same company. I stayed there for 5 years, and mainly I played in the transportation industry. So mainly honestly in the aviation industry. And then I moved out into Swiss Air. I was a co-founder of Swiss International Airlines. From there, I moved into a kind of independent work relationship with DHL, and I worked in the day definite express business. Later on, also in the express business with DHL. And then in 2006, I went back to Roland Berger and developed here as a partner, as a senior partner. In between of my career in the transportation business, and that was really interesting, I have changed the vertical. I went from transportation into consumer goods and retail.
Okay.
And I was leading the consumer goods and retail part over a period of 5 years, from 2015 to 2020. And of course, this was a nice perspective from the other end, from the shipper's end. How do shippers see logistics, and what kind of requirements do they have? And so this is valuable input and insight. Now back to my origin, back to my roots. So I'm heading transportation in Europe. One word about Roland Berger. It's a globally active consultancy company, not as big as the big Americans, but meanwhile with some 3,000 professionals around the world in 38 countries, and so headed by roughly 300 partners in that company. Our roots are in Europe, and also our core focus of activity. That's it, Martin. Hope that serves.
And yeah, that's fine. One more question about Roland Berger and yourself. So, Roland Berger is a strategy consultancy. So you are advising in your industry companies in the logistics about their strategy, how to move forward, isn't it?
That's correct. And there are a number of questions normally linked to trends in that industry. And we are briefly jumping on these trends, which we have called the universe of logistics. Yeah, we are strategy consultants. Just to finish that one.
Hmm.
So we are not so much on the technical and process related side. Means user face adaptation for companies, for example, in the context of SAP implementation or so. That's
Okay.
it is strictly the strategic point of view, and digitization to a certain extent, as long as the strategy might be affected by that. So
So yeah,
talking about, yeah,
go
Martin.
ahead. Explain how the universe of logistics is changing.
Yes, it's a pleasure. When I get contacted from outside, Matthias, what do you see as a prevailing trend? Always people expect me to come up with digitalization. That is one, but on purpose. So what follows now, I have put it to the end of the question. So first of all, logistics is shaken up in these days by geopolitical unrest, by rising energy prices, and by potentially upcoming recession. Let's see how significant that will be. I think this gives much more headaches to the logistics managers compared with the topic of digitization. And so there's a second row of events, mainly affected by Corona. So supply chain resilience. This is one of the buzzwords mostly relevant for shippers, and of course, logistic companies have to adapt to the new paradigms which will be played in supply chain management. As an effect of that, freight rates have been extremely volatile and went the last year through the roof. Just to, I come back to the freight rates in detail,
Hmm.
and but there are more topics which have been driving also the freight rates up. Congested ports, for example, especially in China, driver scarcity, and in the air cargo business, also the entire lack of the belly business in PAX oriented aircraft. So there was a shortage of capacity, and so the root causes for driving up the freight rates in air cargo and in sea cargo were of different natures, but we have reached freight rates 10 times as high as they have been in normal days. So this is something which shakes up a bit the industry, and especially if we look forward and have a kind of hypothesis
Hmm.
how the freight rates are developing further down the road. And then the next one, um, here are opportunities and chances. Here are risks and trends and disruptions and opportunities somehow in a balanced way. So decarbonization and sustainability will be, on the one hand, a new and additional cost factor for logistics companies. At the other hand, there will be opportunities for new business, for differentiated business, for market niche. And the other thing is e-commerce. This was so major parts of the logistics growth have been affected by e-commerce, not so much by the traditional activities of logistics companies, but so to a large extent with e-commerce fulfillment. This is to be understood as well. And then another big trend, and everybody has to decide on which side he wants to play, is consolidation of the business. Here to be differentiated into, on the one hand, horizontal integration. So that's the quite plain consolidation and going for growth in an inorganic setup. The other thing is vertical integration. So this, at least we could observe, driven by shipping lines who sit on a pile of cash and who start to become the so-called integrators of the freight business. We will come back to that point and have a quite interesting discussion on that. And then the last topic is, of course, digitalization. Martin, if you want to add that one to this slide. So digitization, yes, is opening opportunities and is not to be forgotten in the light of all these trends which just have been raised.
Yeah. A question from my side. During COVID-19, I get a question from a director from one of the well-known 3PL companies. They say, okay, now finally during COVID, the 3PL companies are talking to boardroom levels. And a few weeks ago, the same director said, supply chain doesn't seem to be a topic of the boardroom anymore. Because I'm not cold anymore, and my response was, okay, yeah, during COVID, everybody was looking for air freight, sea freight, etc. But do you agree that the supply chain isn't the board topic anymore, or is it that the 3PL company, this one at hand or in general, is played out to some extent?
So I'm a bit biased on that one. So the answer is yes and no. Um, so yes, it is no longer a topic. So that's a bit misleading, no? Freight rates came down. I give you an example. Shipping a container from Rotterdam to Shanghai has reached sometimes slot prices of 18,000 US dollars, and now they're back to 2,000, 1,800 or so. So the pressure is out. Um, and therefore the board members are a bit relaxed. To the other hand, board members should have learned their lessons and should well remember how, to what extent these supply chains are non-resilient and to what extent they might need fallback solutions. To some extent, they might have adapted to the new situation, but this drags forward, and I think it requires a kind of new thinking into that direction. So I only can recommend to board members keep logistics and supply chain management on your agenda. It is way too early to say this is solved. Tick it off.
And the notion that this 3PL company, this big one, is not being called anymore by board members of the shippers company, is that something of a change, of a shift, or?
Sorry, I didn't get your question.
So this board member said, I'm not called anymore by the board members of
Okay.
manufacturing companies.
So if a shipper is calling a logistics company or a big 3PL company, then only because he has got huge problems, he's missing the supply feed into his factory, and there's a standstill of his production conveyor belts. That will be a good reason to call the shipping company. But I tend to say, apart from that, it still is a topic, and the reshaping of supply chains and the relocation of supply chains also is going forward, and much more has just started. So we have a bit of release on that question, but the work is still to be done, and I think it should be kept on the agenda.
Right. Maybe you can dig deeper a bit in the disruptive trends and how it plays out for the different kind of logistic players.
Yes. So first of all, these universe I've just have introduced, these are the trends and disruptions. So we have called it universe. The universe is much bigger, but we needed to develop a certain focus here. So first of all, the question is for the different logistics players, which trend affects me? And so for many people, and so I hope not to step on the feet of anybody now, but very often from a shipper's perspective, yes, there is logistics. Also, especially from a boardroom perspective, yes, there's logistics. We need to have a logistician. So we need to differentiate a bit. What are the key players in a rough sort of order? So integrators, express integrators, we have to be specific now. Last mile providers, it's a kind of new player which has been upcoming here. Contract logistics players, and then we have the entire row of forwarders, so road forwarders, rail, air, and sea, and then we have the operators on road, rail, air, and sea, and in the end we have the shippers and the supply chain managers. So you see the bandwidth of players is quite broad, and you can make it even broader, and not each of these trends applies to all of these players. So I think we cannot discuss who is affected by what, but this is one of the interesting questions these players have to ask themselves. And then, in a second step, we have to talk about appropriate strategies, how to counter these trends or how to answer these trends. So if we go one step further now, if you come into crisis, if you have rising cost of goods sold, you yourself need to consider some cost management, cost containment. You can also do this by digitization of your internal processes, of your back offices. Then you can actively go for growth and complete your portfolio, look into different geographic areas of the world where you are not yet active in such a big extent. Or you can move into other industry verticals, especially if you're contract logistics players. The next point then is a business model adjustment. So will I be just an operator, or do I move from operation into forwarding? Is road the right business, or do I need to internationalize my business? So here we have to ask ourselves a number of questions. Is the business model future proven, and does it give us a kind of sustainable basis for the future? The next point is then have a look at your operating model. What can you do to be more efficient, more effective? Then what we have said, so horizontal integration and vertical integration might be also an answer to these trends. So it's a trend by itself, and it might affect my business, and it could be also a strategy moving forward. So I myself have to drive consolidation, or in the end, I have to accept if I'm getting consolidated. And that's quite interesting question. And in the end, so I've sales or exit out of that industry is also an option. So I talked to a road freight forwarder who told me, the CFO, he told me, so we are looking to actively consolidate or to sell. That was quite an extreme position. He said we are open to both. So it would be too easy to say, hey, tick it off. For you, it is this strategy. For you, it's that one. It relates to the contract, to the context of your company, to your size, and so this is an exercise. You have asked me in the beginning about strategic consultancy. That's the core of the strategic consultancy related to these players.
Yeah, I totally understand. When I look at this, I might be missing the phenomenon of labor shortage, and that could be hampering your business or your growth to a large extent. And then you might have to automate and digitalize to a certain extent. Is it also a major impact to the whole logistic industry in this sense, in a strategic sense?
It is. So it is. If you look at the very left side, the number 6, driver scarcity.
Yeah. Oh,
So
yeah.
it applies for sure also to kind of warehousing business and also to shipping or air cargo. But driver scarcity, especially road freight forwarding, is impacted by that. So the trucks are there. The trucks are also in a scarce resource, but if the trucks are there, you're still lacking the drivers. So you definitely have to pay more money to the drivers, and this again will change the industry. Yes, it is a topic for sure.
Yeah, and it's not only drivers, but it's also data scientists in logistics needed for your platforms and to improve and to do your digitalization within the logistics industry.
That's right. That's yes, absolutely right. So that's a different form of labor shortage. So first of all, the driver scarcity. Somebody told me I have to be happy if I get a lift for my shipments,
Mm.
and I pay any price they ask me. So okay, this was roughly 6 to 8 months ago. And this was really a price driving factor. Of course, if the industry is changing and digitalization is a topic, I need to have the right resources on board. It's not just a strategic decision. Oh, let's digitize our business, or let's create a platform. No, you need to have the right people there, and these people are requested not only in the entire logistics industry, moreover about all industries. That's a scarce resource overall.
Yeah, I got a question for the audience, but before we
Yeah.
ask this question to you, let's go to the geopolitical tensions and go through that, and we have a better overview of what's
Yep.
happening in the world.
Yeah, that's interesting. So if you line it up, and I took the effort. Since 2016, we have an unprecedented event of disruption by disruption by disruption from geopolitical tension. So let's start it start with the Brexit, and negotiations are still ongoing. So the entire business between UK and Europe requires a kind of new setup and gives some headaches to the players respectively. Then what we could observe as of 2018 roughly is a trade war between US and China, and with penalty payments and so on. The next one is the corona pandemic, which was really a tough hit to the industry. So more in terms of capacity scarcity, but also some business models. For example, the what I said in the beginning, the belly space of the aircraft, of the Pax aircraft, suddenly was completely grounded. Huh?
Mhm.
And this brought up the demand for full freighters, and companies who had problems with the P&L in the years before suddenly were key players of profitability. Interesting move here. And then the next one is the Russian-Ukraine conflict. I know a number of forwarders who were specialized on trade flows between Russia and Europe.
Mhm.
So that's a tragedy for them.
Mhm.
But on top of that, this was driving the energy prices. This was redirecting the trade lane flows. So this has got quite a big impact. And not to be forgotten, this hampers the industry confidence into the economy and also the consumer confidence. So it is driving down the GDP, and
Yeah.
this will be felt immediately afterwards by the logistics industry. And the last one, please, let's jointly keep the fingers crossed it never happens, a China-Taiwan conflict. This
Yeah.
would be a disaster for the entire East-West trade activity.
Yeah.
Let's let's not detail it further. It is too nasty to be looked at. But so if you look on the one hand at semiconductors and on the other hand the entire trade flows, trade lanes, this will be a major event to the industry. So quite some shakeup, and either it's driving prices up or it is resulting into huge volatility of freight rates, of demand. It might lead to misallocation of capacity. And in the end, also, it will impact the one or the other company with a view to its liquidity. So first of all, P&L, in the end, it's liquidity and the future of the company. And
Yeah.
this is diverting you from the real focus of strategy. So how to run our business in the future, how to make 3PL sustainable, and how to get fit for a digitalized business, and how to find my USP in the market where I can earn money with. So this is a bit the context of the geopolitical tensions.
Yeah. So the question from the audience is, and you can probably answer it with the next slide. Do you expect corporate companies to drastically change their footprints due to the new reality that you were referring to, geopolitics, fuel prices, logistics constraints?
Yes, to a certain extent, yes. So every company will be happy if they are not forced to do it immediately. I
Mhm.
mean, partially you have construction sites in the other countries or in the respective countries. Partially it is also affecting a big part of your business. But yes, so I think the way of thinking is changing. And as you have had some kind of globalization by all means before, you can we click forward?
Yep.
Martin? This, okay, yeah, it works. So as we have had strongly globalized supply chain network before, we more move towards local supply chain networks. At least we are moving to backup supply chains and towards a kind of shared risk. This is one thing. The next one, just in time, was played globally, and everybody believes it never would change, and it would work like a clockwork. And what we have to observe now, after the corona shortages of material supply, people have started to fill up warehouses again and to build up reserves, which of course is affecting working capital for the shippers. Huh? No doubt
Yeah.
on that.
Yeah.
And then the next one. Companies also had a kind of global delivery footprint, and now what you can see also from sales and operational perspective, people move productions to local markets and uh, uh, try to delineate the market, a regional market performance from a supply chain out of another region. This is not always possible, but there's a certain tendency to do so.
So you
And
see,
then
next to friend shoring, you see near shoring and these kind of flavors.
it's yeah near. Let's call it nearshoring and not complete reverse of offshoring, but let's call it kind of nearshoring. And it is more playing with options
Yeah,
and drawing scenarios. What would happen if, and then being prepared for these kind of scenarios. And the next investment decision on a warehouse, on a production site, and an end will take this into consideration. Another interesting thing is, I mean, we're all used by the fact that digitization allows more complexity, and but what we can see as well, that from, let's take automotive industry for example, from a very high number of variants in which a car can be produced. So the industry is moving back to a variant reduction to reduce
yeah.
complexity and to get more control back on the flow of supply chain, in order in order to have a control on the risk overall. Yeah? And the last one, yeah, I've said it a few times. So, no, I've said it a few times about risk management. So far, neither shippers nor the logistics players have had a really decent and honest risk management, as you know it, for example, out of the banking industry,
Yeah.
giving out loans and so on. So, from a limited risk management, the entire industry will move for sure towards a much more sustainable and serious risk management. So these are the changes related to supply chain management, and it results in the one or the other decision. Let's be more prudent with our investment decisions, and let's decide where to do it.
So I met you earlier this year, and we talked about freight rates. Maybe we can talk about a bit more what the impact is, and maybe your expectations for looking onward.
Yes, please. Um, I was a bit under pressure right before this meeting. Otherwise, I would have updated that slide.
Hmm.
So what we see is, so on the left side is sea freight, on the right side is air freight. Both went through the roof with the following impact: shipping lines have earned a huge pile of money, and full freighter cargo carriers did so as well, and to a certain extent also the belly carriers, but to larger time periods throughout Corona, they couldn't bring up their aircrafts into the air. I said it in the beginning. The container rate from Rotterdam to Shanghai was in the area of partially it was below 1,000, and it went up to 10,000 to 15,000 to never seen heights in that industry, um, and which resulted into huge earnings of the shipping lines.
Yeah.
And the same, but for different reasons, happened in the air freight section. So on the shipper side, it was more congestion of ports, and on the airline side, it was the absence of the belly business, and
Yeah.
then the renaissance of the full freighters. Um, at that height, there was a certain gold rush, also driven by private equity companies investing in these kind of companies. I only can recommend everybody have a forecast on where the rates are going,
Yeah.
and how a company looks like with normalized rates. Um, and the same applies, by the way, to forwarders. I mean, forwarders are traders of capacity plus value added services. But trading this capacity is very often still a cost plus calculation. And of course, they have benefited from this development. And of course, they will take, if the rates come down again, the so called misbenefits if it goes back to normal.
I was wondering, in the last few weeks, I was reading more about the notion that the shippers, so the people who want to have their stuff shipped, talked about revenge. Taking revenge on the whole shipping companies. Is that realistic? And what, to what extent are they able to take revenge? And life goes on. And what is your take on this notion of revenge by the shippers?
Um, well, the shipping industry, not the shippers, so the logistics industry has played it smartly and has made their money. I mean, the demand or the mismatch between demand and capacity supply has been driving up the rates. That's part of our system. I don't expect a revanche, especially then also the 3PL companies. They are the intermediaries between logistics operators and shippers. So nobody was playing really with bad thoughts against his business partner. I don't believe in this revanche
No.
theory, but so shippers will be a bit released with the freight rates coming down, and in the logistics industry, the gold rush is calming down a bit. This will be the future. And if we look forward, and that's on the next page, I mean, there's a good and a less good news. So the good news is the global volumes in sea freight and also air freight are forecasted to grow roughly 3%, 3 to 4% in sea freight and some 3% in air freight. There's a bit of an uncertainty related to that. All the questions about sustainability and carbon footprint reduction, so that this might also lead to some modal shift. But this is a careful forecast, 3%. I wouldn't say it's too wrong. So that's a positive outlook. But what is clearly said is so where do the freight rates move to? If we take 2019 as a 100% position,
Mhm.
people have told me so the industry, hopefully, the industry doesn't go back fully to the 100% or even below, because shipping lines were suffering partially from a lack of profitability. So
Mhm.
people expected that the rates end up somewhere in the order of 140% of 2019. In between, it has been in some instances already below that, but this was a kind of a joint and common forecast in the industry. In the air freight industry, it was more said these rates go down to 120% roughly of the 2019 level.
Mm. It's an interesting looking forward. And let's look at how the industry has been developing with a lot of consolidation. Maybe you can explain a bit more in that sense. And there's also a question from the audience in that area.
Mm. Yeah, we'll do. This is a rough overview of course, it's about the big players in the market, and you see what has happened. So this is over the past years, let's say, kind of significant mergers in the industry. You see that DSV is quite an active player in there,
Yeah.
but also CMA, CGM. So a shipping line was buying Seva, DSV was buying Panalpina, Maersk was in the game, Hapag-Lloyd was in the game, and. So let's not dive into all of those. But the question, of course, is developing a certain pressure for the mid-sized companies. So they need to develop their kind of outlook. What do I want to be? So getting maybe merged sooner or later and being consolidated or be a consolidator. This is a bit of a key question for a certain size of company, not for small companies, but more for those who still can be swallowed by size and also by the preparedness of their shareholder potentially to sell, or they need to develop a plan how to grow themselves.
Yeah.
So
When you
this is
look at,
horizontal.
yeah.
Yeah.
No, I was looking at DSV. I know DSV quite well, and they, expanded around the world to get a footprint in the US and other industries. So that's their game. But still, on logistics service provider area, so the 3PL services and some road carrier networks, they expanded. But you see
So
also some Maersk going into the logistic world. That's a new way.
that's a new one. One last word to this one. Logistics has got two parts of the medal. On the one hand, logistics is a commodity business, and in a commodity business, size is a topic and price is a topic.
Yeah.
And so you go for volume, and then you have also the option to slightly reduce prices and to even buy more of your market share. To the other hand, of course, everybody is seeking for options to create additional value in this way, to differentiate from the commodity business, and to generate new sources of revenue. So that's name of the game. But size and global footprint is a very important factor to be successful in that business, especially for 3PL business.
So maybe you can
And
move over to the
yes,
vertical integration.
yeah, that's something interesting. I recently have run a number of interviews on vertical integration. Um, de facto, this is something that is it is an event driven by shipping lines, and what you can see here. So three examples: Maersk, CMA, CGM, and MSC.
Hmm.
All of the three between 2015 and 2021 have spent incredible amounts in getting into different steps of the value chain. So diverting from pure ocean shipping, first of all, into terminal business, but then also into land freight, into forwarding, and an end. And one of these players even has created uh, the new notion of integrator of general freight. So when I once started in this business in my very, very early years, I once have asked my manager, tell me what's an integrator? And I was working in the express business. And he explained me, listen, lead time in the express business is everything.
Hmm.
And in order to control the lead time and to have the reliability in the business, you need to control every step, and therefore we are an integrator. Huh? So it's the entire uplink, then it is the international part, and it's the downlink and last mile and depot and everything. Um, if you're in the shipping business and the shipment from Shanghai to Rotterdam takes you 4 weeks, you have to ask yourself, so why should I optimize by an hour or half a day if it is anyhow underway for 4 weeks? This is a bit the reactive question. To the other end, there are, of course, opportunities related to that. As I said, logistics by itself is a commodity business, and but if you control it end to end, you have many more opportunities to differentiate your product, and you can create slower products, faster products. You can much more play around and have a different suite of products for different customer segments. Also, just to name it as one opportunity, I so far I never believed into air sea combinations. But if you look into the problem of air freight shipments and you see the CO2 footprint, so if you bring this down, so a 2 days lead time from A to B, so from Asia into Europe, and if you bring it down to let's say 2 weeks lead time with a combination of air and sea, you can reduce your carbon footprint by something of between 60 and 80%. And you run a lead time compared to sea freight, which is still 2 weeks faster than that one. So it allows you to go for product differentiation with a view to lead time, but also with other value added services, which is really interesting and might reshape the industry.
Yeah, so the question from the audience is, how do you see the entrance of ocean carriers into the air freight space? Is it really a new business model or opportunistically driven by customer demands? So you answered to some extent, but do you see it as a strategic move?
I've just, I mean, partially I've just have said. So
Mhm.
much more air freight carriers might want to enter into the sea freight section in order to go for that carbon footprint reduction. But
Mm.
the point is, sea freight carriers have earned the big pile of money,
Yeah,
especially the sea freight carriers, and they have the money to spend. And they have to ask themselves, do we get back to former years, or do we somehow try to change the industry? Um,
but the,
so I
but the,
see.
yeah, but does it mean that you will go with by ship to Dubai, and out of Dubai you fly in the last
You have,
leg to Europe?
it could be an example. So whether it's Dubai, Qatar,
Yeah.
or somewhere in India or Thailand, I don't know, um, go by vessel to this one central point and then have your distribution by aircraft and be quite fast in your lead time. So compared to a normal shipping setup. That could be an option. The question is, how big is the market, or is it only a niche? But for sure, this will be an interesting revenue position between the pure air freight and the pure sea freight.
Yeah. Getting back to the mid-range of 3PL companies, there are very specialized family-owned businesses, especially in Germany. Are a lot of them. They have their niche, but they have to make sure they have some extra value next to the commodities. So there are some specialized 3PL companies in Europe, especially on a mid-sized level. But the question would be, are they good enough, and do they offer enough service wanted by the shippers or their customers?
You mean if either one of these three players or other upcoming players,
Yeah,
if
the
they are
DSVs, all these
stealing,
players are
if they
going
are
into.
stealing the business or making them redundant?
Yeah.
Um, Again, the answer is yes and no. I think they will get some market share out of the 3PL business. It would not lead to a sudden death. This would be completely exaggerated, but it might lead to some 2, 3, 4, 5% shift of market share into other regions. So it is an interesting setup. There are also, especially if you talk to investors, there are also some risks attached to that. An investor wants to see a kind of pure business type layout. I once had the discussion with a big tour operator who was owning also aircraft, and the investors rather were calling for a pure trading setup or an asset heavy setup, namely the airline. So the question is, a trader will be steered differently than an asset operator. So this is a bit the risk and the challenge in this model. But always looking positively forward, I see the opportunities in shaping new products as interesting. Will it be the world-changing thing? Let's see, but it's an interesting move.
Maybe we should address the topic of digitalization and the different
Yes.
levels, and maybe you can have an answer to this question about it.
Yeah. So one more common page here on digitization. So we distribute here between three different shapes of digitization. So the first one is the automation of repetitive tasks. This is more internally, behind the scenes. There are other companies who, by the way, differentiate between digitization and digitalization. This is a bit of fine line now. But so this first one is get your processes under control and be up to date with your own ERP system, with your own processes, and with your own data handling, and also RPA, and so robot process automation in administration will take or stands for some potential of efficiency increase. And then the next one is digitalize across the borders of your own system, so into the rest of the world. Have so-called interconnected supply chains, go for cloud computing, blockchain solutions, and so on. And then on top of that, you have so-called intelligent applications and supported by artificial intelligence. So these are three different stages of digitalization applicable to companies. And now, if we apply this to the logistics industry and look at shippers, forwarders, and carriers, it's interesting. They are pulling potentially in different directions. So, what does a forwarder want? Digitalization and a modern ERP system helps them to increase the number of files per FTE per day. So this is a quite interesting KPI, and he gets more efficient with that one. And freight forwarders still discuss internally, should we go for virtual forwarding for zero touch sales and operations afterwards. This would be a major step forward. In a bit of a self-defense, forwarders tend to say it still needs manual interference, and that's not completely wrong. But this would enable them to act with less people on the same volume or even on a higher volume. And then but by all means, forwarders, of course, try to sustain their value add in the value chain, and they try to add on some other topics, for example, like dynamic pricing, which you don't have in this industry to the same extent as you have it in the parks business of airline industry.
Yeah.
Shippers have different directions of their thinking. So first of all, if you can manage a so-called self-trimming supply chain, it will lead to the reduction of working capital. So the the recent months have told them, or years, 2 years, have told them, listen, if your supply chain is not resilient, some working capital in the warehouses might make sense. Secondly, then shippers are striving for transparency in the shipment status, but this is not a complicated part. But still, the techniques are developing around that, and of course, shippers are going for a lower cost of overall logistics expenditure. And by the way, I once talked to the CEO of a fashion company, and I proposed him to go for some savings in the order of 40 million within his supply chain. He was looking at me and then shaking his head and saying, "That's that's not my top interest. I want to have a new release of a fashion line within days in all my stores around the world. That's important to me." So that tells me partially logistics is still too cheap, and for a number of years, logistics has not been a boardroom topic. So maybe it was a good development the industry has taken in the recent time. Then carriers, of course, what do they want? I mean, they are seeking for the opportunities to get in direct connection with a shipper. They're dreaming of that one, without, of course, without completely annoying the forwarders, because forwarders are responsible for a big part of the business, which gets allocated then to the shippers. So carriers might seek for new end-to-end solutions, as we just have discussed it, and of course, carriers this way would have more control on their own load factor and rate combination. So they're to a lesser extent somebody who benefits from high freight rates or suffers from low freight rates. They have more control of their business. So, and of course, carriers, especially in the road business, can go for return freight, as we already have it established today. So, last comment on that one: platforms is a kind of pink cloud at the horizon. So, as I've said, in the road business, it's already there. But in the international logistics, the place still needs to be sorted out. Who is running these platforms, and who's benefiting from these platforms, and who maybe might also lose some percentages of market shares towards these platforms.
When I look at this platform, there are new platforms coming up on end-to-end supply chain visibility or real-time transport visibility. You have Project 44, you have Shipio, you have Forecast, and a few more. Transporio is more offering this kind of functionality. Basically, these platforms are claiming real-time transport visibility to the shippers, but on the other hand, they need the connection to the carriers, to the trucks, to get this real-time information.
Yeah.
And that's a new play being played out on one hand. And on the other hand, the forwarders used to have their own visibility tool with the connections they had with their carriers. So that's a new entrance of a few players getting in this whole game.
Yeah, that's right. There are a number of questions related to that. So first of all, you have mentioned a few of them. These are, I wouldn't call them platforms. I would rather call them intelligent applications. A platform in the sense of Booking.com or
Yeah,
Expedia will be way more complete in terms of supply and demand. So this is currently this is an upcoming battle. So which kind of technique will succeed, and which kind of business model will succeed, and will you play the platform completely asset free? Can a forwarder play this kind of platform, or won't he? Or will he undermine his own business situation with that? So this is not yet fully sorted out. Also, the questions: do the platforms operate assets, trucks, for example? in order to be more resilient against driver scarcity? These are different questions. So the battle is not yet fully sorted out, and you can observe players who were claiming that they are fully digitalized, that they suddenly open up branch offices all around the world in order to cater for irregularities in terms of shipping, or for containers lost back on the quay, instead of having it on the ship. So that's an interesting topic, and worth a number of thoughts, how to reshape the business model and how to cooperate with platforms. And the last comment on that one, if you give, as a carrier, capacity into a platform, you need to have a good revenue management and pricing at your own end. And as long as you don't have it, you are a bit playing with the fire, and there's a certain danger that you are dragged down into a price war. So you must have the ability to steer a platform and to steer the allocated capacity towards a platform.
Yeah, yeah, and probably you are referring to platforms like Instafreight and Sender, and these kind of new scale up coming
These,
up.
no, I was I was much more referring to an international shipment platform where carriers will meet shippers without forwarders. Uh, then the carriers need to give control to their
Yeah.
inventory. And if they are not able on their side to completely steer it, that's where I've said they are playing with the fire. So there's a number of unsolved questions, but it's from an intellectual standpoint and from the business opportunity perspective, it is very, very interesting.
Maybe we get a bit further in this direction, talking about the different steps of 1, 2, 3PL and the 4PL. So where does it all lead to? Because companies are looking for control towers. Do they want to have their own control tower, logistic control tower in a manufacturing company, or do they want to outsource it?
That's so we have called it food for thought, without any evidence or fact behind that. So this is a bit an outlook and a question. So more for discussion than as a statement. It will happen like this. The question is, there was a process of outsourcing dragging forward over years and years and years. So from towards the 2PL business, 3PL business, and the 4PL business. So the interesting question here for discussion is, will there be maybe a kind of reverse way, that outsourced services come back more closer towards the reach of the shippers? Why? The first argument is supply chain resilience. You can't leave the entire business. So the lifeline and the material feed to your production, can I leave it completely to another company? Or do I want to regain control of that and to shape fallback solutions for my supply chain? So this is the first argument. The second is, do I have the opportunity as a shipper to potentially connect directly with carriers via platforms or via one-to-one agreements? The next point is, the vertical integration of carriers might embrace also the forwarding activity. And the last one is also the impact of circular economy. So does it put kind of shippers and their vendors closer together, and they need to control this last element of the supply chain, or this additional element of the supply chain, namely circular economy. This is just food for thought. I'm not stating it will be like that, but it is worth a discussion for sure.
Uh, for the matter of time's sake, we want to move over to the circularity part. So here are some facts about how things will change in the crude
Yeah.
oil and the natural gas. But maybe we'll move over to the next slide, where we can explain what is the urgency for the logistics industry to move into the right direction.
Yes. So first of all, sustainability. There are chances and risk, both lying quite close to each other. So let's start with the framework on the left side. Sustainability is a part of the larger ESG context. So environmentally, social, governmental rules, which will be applied to companies upcoming. And secondly, there's a European commitment to a pathway towards net zero by 2050 and a significant reduction already by 2030. So in some industries we talk about 45, in some industries 55% by 2030. So that's a fact, and this will be underlined by appropriate tax regulations for CO2 emissions. Next thing is shippers who are, so let's call it in a different way, consumer good producers, which are shippers as well. They will be very prudent on their emissions as they are, how to say, as they are on stage under review of their consumers. And the last thing you want to have is being put on stage as a kind of dirty producer of shipments and of consumer goods. So they want to be clean. They need to do it. They have to avoid by all means to be on the other part of the life where people say this is no longer viable. So they will be very prudent with their scope 1 and 2 emissions, but also with their so-called scope 3 emissions of their vendors. And logistics operators belong to them. And there are some shippers who are quite brutal in that way. And you say, you can drive for me, you can ship my goods either green or you go nowhere. And they leave the cost increase partially to the logistics companies. And so logistics providers, they need to be aware of that, the increased demand for sustainability. And of course, they have to look also how to get back this cost, and they have to build new revenue models. And this is on the right side of this slide. So what is to be done for logistics providers, for everybody, by the way? First of all, a baselining. Where do I stand with scope 1 and 2 emissions, also with the scope 3 emissions? Have a CO2 calculator to be up to date and to make it part of my offering. Then understand the upcoming tax regulations, and there will be quite a lot of money due if you don't work on your CO2 footprint. Also understand the entire legislation and governmental interference with that. Every company needs to develop its roadmap to net zero, playing the entire toolbox of options. So it could be operations efficiency, avoiding empty carriage of so empty trucks on a return way and an end. Of course, it should be self-understanding, but nonetheless, it is an important part of reducing the CO2 footprint. Secondly, go for sustainable fuel, which also needs to be secured. By far, we do not have enough sustainable fuel to serve the entire logistics industry. Go for new technology as own assets are concerned. Invest into carbon storage, for example, options. Do it with partnerships. Have other parts of compensation models, and maybe also review your modal split if you're a forwarder or a shipper. And then you have to have a closer look at your P&L. What does it mean to me in future? The taxes, capex for new technology, higher fuel prices for the sustainable fuel. And then there's something which we call creating a green product. So first of all, you need to understand your customer. Is there willingness to pay for a green product? And or how could I launch this green product besides my other product, leaving the customer at least the option to have a choice? And once all that is done, yes, you need to go for an asset rollover. You have to cater for a certain financing of these assets. You have to go for partnerships with a view to decarbonization investments. And in the end, of course, you can open up your eyes towards circular economy. Does it inherit chances also for a company, opportunities for new business? So it's that's a long story. And so the good thing is, this topic is on stage. It is on the boardroom level. It should be on the boardroom level. And secondly, it requires certain activity. If you don't act, you will be out sooner or later.
Yeah, thanks, Matthias. Good to know this story. We have these figures, what we should achieve in the next decade, and there's a lot to gain. So
Yeah,
people
we
can
what
read
we
this.
see what we see here is the carbon footprint of the logistics industry. Oh my God, I'm lacking here a subtitle. Whether this is Europe only? No, it's Germany,
Germany.
and
Yes,
it
Germany.
is Germany. So what we see here is that the big chunk of reduction relates to road freight transport,
Yeah,
which could be, by the way, an opportunity for the rail industry. So have a kind of combi traffic between rail and road. But on that angle, I mean, we need to solve some infrastructure problems as well. But the task is huge. Reduce CO2 emissions until 2030 by 48% for the road freight transport. This is a huge task.
yeah.
And
Matthias, actually, we are almost out of time, or we are out of time. But we have an extra 30 minutes, but we want to reserve it also for in the lounge. So you have an excellent slide about technology, but people can read it and they can download it.
people,
So
yeah, yeah, people can read it nonetheless. So here, one topic is you need sooner or later you need to take an investment decision,
yep,
and especially for road freight companies, this is not an easy task.
yep,
On which technology should I bet? Yeah, is it fuel cell, battery, biofuels, whatsoever? What shall I do? This is a certain no, this is an uncertainty for the companies where they have to manage through, and this is also one of the tasks lying ahead of them.
yeah. And the final slide, but actually, I don't know if people want to ask questions or rather go into the lounge. But so we are moving into the circular economy, and then the question would be, what would be the role of the logistic service providers, and how should we address it? And
Yeah, that's a good point, and I take it rather positive than negatively. So if this is a very rough and high level display of our supply chain, so from raw material to manufacturing, then downstream into retail and into distribution to the consumers, and from there into waste management. The question is, so if we close now the supply chain loop and go for circular economy means for material recovery, and we did it here at the example of with the example of consumer goods industry.
mhm.
So my statement is the, here's an opportunity to broaden the focus. Of course, the kind of solution must be vertical specific. There are three, in rough terms, there are three candidates to capture the business. So either the manufacturers go for the circular economy, or waste management companies ramp up for that, or this might be also an option for logistics service providers to collect the material, to go for sorting, separation. I think the reprocessing into new raw material must be done then in a partnership with a specialized company. But so here, from my perspective, there is a new value stream which is to be ramped up, and there's an opportunity also for logistics players in here.
All right. Supply Chain Media has created a similar ecosystem visualization. So here you see all these parties involved. So in the brown area, you see the recycling company at the lower end, and the logistic companies, but also the manufacturing companies. So this is the visualization of a whole ecosystem. In this matter, it's household products. So the Procter and Gamble and the Reckitt world, Unilever. So this is the visualization, and this is a visualization to be used in the board of directors. What kind of role would we want to play, and where do we start with the circular economy? So that's the purpose why I show this. So this is also available online. Um, we are already over the hour, so yeah, there should be room for one or two questions. Um, um, One question to wrap it up. There's a lot of talk about increased sustainability reporting requirements for all types of companies. What impact do you see for logistics and supply chain companies?
Uh, at a different stage. So if you look into the air freight industry, there are little options apart from sustainable aviation fuel and compensation. As shipping lines are concerned, you can go for liquid gas, you can go for hydrogen. There's some impressive activities already underway. I'm not making advertising, but I accidentally I know that Maersk, for example, is very very active in going down the path, and they are aiming. If I'm not wrong, they're aiming for net zero already in 2030, 2040. So they're quite active here. For road players, they need to have a strategy. Um, Sooner or later, they will be hit by the fact that they create a certain carbon footprint, and they need to be ready for that, and they need to be prepared for either new technique or for sustainable fuel or for respective compensation payments or for penalty taxes. And penalty tax will be a bad marketing, and shippers will be reluctant employing these companies further on. So that's a bit the set out of this situation currently.
And now you see also new players in the software field coming up for carbon footprint measurements, also especially from individual trips by truck.
Yes,
You need to do that, and also the shippers, your customers, will ask for that. That you have your big mile measurements of your carbon footprint of individual trips by truck and deliveries. So that will be a demand in the next years.
that's for sure. I see it as first of all, I see it as a part of the baselining.
Hmm.
Secondly, you can give an invoice to your shipper and tell them, listen, that's your footprint. So induced by our trucks, but we have been shipping your goods. That's your footprint. You can pay for that, and then you can claim your emission free. By the
Hmm.
way, I'm not a fan of compensation, but it's better than nothing. Um, yes, there are new players. You might need it in the long term. Of course, your technique should be CO2 free, and then this accounting goes in a different direction. Yeah, but so far, currently, you need it to get the problem obvious.
All right. Again, uh, like I said, we are over time. We will be there for the next 23 minutes in the lounge. So if you want to talk to Matthias and myself, we will be sitting at table one. So you can join us to have a further conversation about this topic. There's still a lot to be said about this whole topic, evidently. Otherwise, we wouldn't be run over time. Next to the left, you see the 3PL subway map Europe we created in 2020 for the last time. You can download it, so you see all the major players with their service lines. So freight forwarding, the carriers, the 3PL companies, also the e-fulfillment parties involved. So that's the whole world in logistics in Europe represented in a subway map. And on the right hand side, you see a very intriguing trend compendium 2050 by Roland Berger, also to be downloaded. So you can download this information for further reading about looking into the future and looking what's happening in the logistic industry. With that, Matthias, I would like to thank you for your valuable overview of this whole complex world. Thank you for joining us.
It was a pleasure.
And
Thank you for listening.
yeah, and I would like to thank the audience for listening in, and maybe you will listen to the recording. And if you want to join us next, please join us in the lounge if you want to have a further conversation with Matthias and myself for the next 20 minutes or so. Thanks a lot, and see you next time. And bye bye.
Thank you.